"She doesn't belong here." The words weren't shouted, but they echoed through the ballroom as the bride's eyes locked on the black maid she had marked for ridicule. A gown glittered, a tray trembled, and a silence spread so thick even the chandeliers seemed to pause. Yet while the crowd turned away, the maid stood tall, her grace unbroken. What happened next would shake every guest into remembering that respect cannot be bought. Stay with us, because what began as mockery ended in justice no one could ignore. The Harrington estate shimmered like a kingdom untouched by time, its ivory columns rising above gardens that smelled of roses and cut grass, its marble fountains scattering light into prisms with every spray. Guests began to arrive in sleek black cars, their laughter carried on the breeze, their attire glittering as though the wedding were less about vows and more about spectacle. Inside the mansion, chandeliers blazed with golden fire, each crystal bead catching the afternoon sun as staff hurried to meet the endless demands of perfection. Every glass was polished twice, every ribbon tied with exacting care, because nothing less would be tolerated at the wedding of Adrian Harrington, the man who had built an empire out of code and contracts, the millionaire groom whose life had become a kind of myth.
In the shadow of such grandeur moved Lila Bennett, her steps quiet, her eyes focused, her body trained to blend into the background while ensuring the celebration ran flawlessly. At 26, she had mastered the art of invisibility. The black and white uniform stiff on her frame was both armor and disguise, concealing the weight of long shifts and the ache that pulled at her shoulders. Her deep bronze skin glowed beneath the unforgiving lights, her dark eyes catching detail others missed, the misaligned fork, the glass smudged with a careless fingerprint, the guest who shifted impatiently because his champagne had yet to arrive. Lila fixed it all with the grace of someone who knew her worth, even if no one else cared to see it. To the guests, she was a shadow at the edge of their photographs, a silent figure darting between tables with polished trays and polite bows. To the other staff, she was steady hands and quiet encouragement, the one who never snapped under pressure, who covered when others faltered. She moved as though she belonged to this world of grandeur, though every reminder whispered she did not. The contrast was sharp, the glimmering pearls and diamond hairpieces of the arriving women, the tailored tuxedos of the men, and her simple utilitarian uniform, designed to erase the woman inside it. Yet there was something in the way she carried herself, a calm authority woven into her posture, a dignity that could not be pressed out of her with starch or discipline.
As music floated from the grand hall and laughter spilled across the estate, Lila adjusted a silver platter on her arm and steadied her breath. She did not know it yet, but her presence in these halls would become more than service. Before the last toast was raised and the final dance spun under the chandeliers, she would force everyone, from the gilded guests to the bride herself, to confront what true grace looked like when stripped of diamonds and titles. Victoria Harrington glided into the ballroom as if the entire estate had been constructed for this single entrance. The gown clung to her figure like it had been poured in silk, the pearl embroidery catching each flicker of candlelight until she shimmered like a living jewel. A tiara of diamonds rested in her golden hair, its brilliance cold, almost severe, and her pale blue eyes surveyed the room not with warmth but with calculation. She smiled often, but it was the kind of smile that held no softness, a perfect curve of lips crafted for photographs and society columns, not for affection. To the guests, she was breathtaking. To those who knew her rhythm, there was a razor edge beneath every graceful step. Whispers followed her like perfume. Some guests murmured about her beauty, others about the speed of her engagement to Adrian, the man whose fortune could buy entire neighborhoods. The staff, however, traded glances weighted with truth. They had seen her temper in rehearsal dinners, had been ordered to redo entire floral arrangements because a single bloom was out of place, had endured the clipped tones of a woman who seemed to relish proving her superiority. To Victoria, perfection was not a pursuit, but a weapon, and she wielded it mercilessly against those who served her. Lila noticed it instantly, though she kept her gaze trained downward, the tray of champagne flutes balanced carefully in her hands. As she stepped into Victoria's orbit, the air shifted. The bride's eyes skimmed her uniform as though the black fabric itself was an offense, her lips tightening into something that might have been mistaken for a smile but was closer to disdain. When Lila offered the tray, Victoria's hand lingered, not on the crystal stemware but on the moment, stretching silence into a performance. She plucked a flute with unnecessary slowness, her gaze never leaving Lila's face, and in that icy stare was the unspoken declaration, "You do not belong here." The exchange lasted only seconds, but its echo lingered. Lila lowered her tray and moved on, her steps steady, though her pulse quickened beneath her calm exterior. She had encountered condescension before, but there was something different in Victoria's presence, something deliberate. This was not simple dismissal. It was a challenge, a warning cloaked in glitter and pearls. And as the band struck up its first notes and applause filled the air, Lila sensed that the bride's cruelty, already whispered about in shadows, would not remain hidden long under the blaze of chandeliers and watchful eyes. Tonight, Victoria's beauty would dazzle, but her ice would cut deeper still. The garden glowed beneath the weight of extravagance, every rose petal chosen for its hue, every ribbon of silk flowing like sunlight caught in fabric. Guests settled into their chairs with murmurs of awe, their voices blending with the soft trill of a string quartet hidden behind a wall of hydrangeas. Photographers snapped endlessly, immortalizing each detail as if the wedding were not just a union but a spectacle to be consumed by the world. The arch stretched overhead in a canopy of roses and gold, framing the aisle like a pathway to heaven itself. It was not love that filled the air, but expectation, each guest watching, judging, measuring the day against the unspoken rules of wealth. Lila slipped through this theater with quiet efficiency. She adjusted champagne flutes so they glistened evenly in the sun, brushed an invisible speck of dust from a chair, and realigned a place card that had tilted ever so slightly. Her movements carried the rhythm of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Steps silent, hands steady, eyes always searching for flaws no one else would ever notice. And yet she might as well have been invisible. The lenses of the cameras skimmed over her, the conversations passed around her like she was part of the furniture, a fixture of service rather than a person with breath and purpose. Adrian Harrington stood at the altar, polished and untouchable in a tailored tuxedo that fit like a second skin. His expression was carved into serenity for the cameras, but when his eyes strayed for the briefest moment, they found her. It was nothing, just a flicker, a glance carried across the garden as Lila bent to straighten a chair at the aisle's edge. Still, there was something in the curve of her posture, the calm strength in her face, that seemed to hold him for half a breath longer than it should have. His features remained unreadable, but the pause lingered, like an echo he couldn't quite dismiss. Victoria, radiant in her pearl-draped gown, swept past the guests as gasps rippled and phones lifted high to capture her every step. She did not notice Adrian's fleeting distraction. She only saw the adoration aimed at her, the performance unfolding exactly as she had envisioned. But in the quiet space between camera shutters, where roses swayed and sunlight filtered across the lawn, a strange undercurrent stirred. Lila continued her work, unseen yet undeniable, as if her grace, buried beneath the sheen of diamonds, was already writing itself into the story no one had expected to tell. The garden had transformed into a glittering ballroom beneath the stars, fairy lights strung across the oak trees casting a golden glow on gowns and tuxedos. Laughter rippled like champagne bubbles, and the air carried the mingled scents of roses, wine, and roasted delicacies from silver trays. A string quartet played softly, their music weaving through the clink of glasses and the murmur of conversations. It was the kind of reception designed to impress, every detail curated to showcase wealth, beauty, and control. Yet beneath the polish, a quiet tension simmered, waiting for the smallest spark to expose it. That spark came in the form of a careless hand. Victoria Harrington, seated at the head table in her gleaming gown, leaned too far as Lila passed with a fresh bottle of red. The glass toppled with theatrical precision, wine splashing across the crisp white of Lila's apron and staining the black fabric beneath. The gasp rose instantly from nearby tables, followed by a hush that pressed down like velvet. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Victoria's voice, sharp and dripping with disdain, sliced through the silence. "Even the help can't stay tidy in a dress code this simple." The words hung heavy, cruel and deliberate, a weapon disguised as wit. A few guests chuckled uneasily, the kind of laughter born not from amusement but from the need to escape discomfort. Others looked away, unwilling to meet Lila's eyes, unwilling to confront the ugliness unfolding before them. A handful of phones lifted discreetly, cameras catching the stain, the sneer, the humiliation carefully staged by the bride herself. Lila's chest was damp, the cold of the wine seeping through her uniform. But it was not the physical discomfort that seared her. It was the weight of every gaze, the cruel satisfaction etched across Victoria's flawless face. For one suspended moment her hands trembled at her sides, but she drew a breath, steady and low, and bowed her head. "My apologies, ma'am," she murmured, though the fault was not hers to claim. She turned with quiet composure, lifting another tray as though nothing had changed, her dignity intact despite the sting of public scorn. Victoria smirked, basking in her victory, her laughter cutting through the air like glass breaking. Yet for those who watched closely, it was not the bride's cruelty they would remember. It was the way Lila walked away, graceful, unbroken, carrying herself with a strength no stain could diminish. And in that moment, the story of the evening began to shift. The night deepened into a spectacle of light and excess, chandeliers swaying gently above the long banquet tables, their golden glow reflected in crystal glasses and polished silverware. The guests dined as if they were royalty, plates of delicacies carried in flawless rhythm by the staff, each dish a portrait of opulence. Music drifted through the garden, mingling with laughter and clinking forks. Yet beneath the glittering scene lay a current of unease. The earlier incident with the spilled wine had not gone unnoticed. Whispers had already begun to circulate, small currents of gossip rippling beneath the surface. And at the center of it all sat Victoria, her beauty untouched, her smile sharpened into something predatory. When Lila approached with the next course, her steps steady despite the weight of countless eyes, the air seemed to tighten. She set the porcelain dish before the bride, hands careful, movements practiced. But Victoria leaned back with exaggerated disgust, her voice loud enough to pierce through the music. "Unfit for service," she announced, the words tumbling like stones into the silence. "Do you even know how to handle fine china?" The impact was immediate. A collective gasp swept the tables, forks stilled midair, conversations cut short. Some guests shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting from Lila to Victoria, as if searching for a way to undo what had just been said. Others lowered their gazes, preferring to hide behind napkins rather than confront the cruelty unfolding before them. Still, no one spoke. Wealth had its own rules, and few dared break them. Lila's hands quivered for a breath, the tremor betraying the sting of humiliation. But she pressed through it, lowering the dish onto the table with meticulous care, her composure as deliberate as her silence. She did not meet Victoria's eyes, nor did she allow her own to cloud with shame. She simply stood, finished the task, and stepped back, her spine a line of quiet defiance. Victoria's laugh followed, high-pitched and brittle, shattering the moment into shards of mockery. It was the kind of laughter meant to wound, to turn dignity into spectacle. For a moment, it seemed she had succeeded, the bride triumphant in her cruelty, the maid reduced to a prop in her theater of superiority. But in the hush that followed, beneath the rustle of silk gowns and shifting chairs, something else stirred. A discomfort took root, subtle but undeniable, among the witnesses. For while Victoria's beauty glittered, it was Lila's restraint, luminous and unyielding, that began to command the room. The laughter that had once floated freely through the garden died at the sound of Adrian Harrington's chair scraping back. The music faltered, violins hanging on uncertain notes as every head turned. He rose with the slow precision of a man who did not need to rush to command attention. The navy tuxedo sculpted his frame like armor, his silver cufflinks glinting faintly in the chandelier light above. There was no fire in his stride as he crossed the lawn, only the gravity of inevitability, and it carried more weight than any outburst could have. Victoria's smile wavered, the curve of her lips stiffening as her husband's shadow stretched across the table. She shifted in her pearl-draped gown, as though her own performance had been interrupted mid-scene. The guests leaned forward, drawn into the tension, their unease crystallizing into silence. Adrian stopped at the edge of the long table, his gaze anchored to hers, steady and unblinking. His voice came low, deliberate, and sharp enough to cut glass. "Enough!" The word cracked the air. It was not shouted, but it struck with the force of thunder rolling through the garden. The chandeliers swayed faintly as if even the air recognized the change. Murmurs rippled and died just as quickly, guests frozen between curiosity and dread. Victoria blinked rapidly, her smirk faltering into something fragile, a confusion she could not disguise. For once, her control had slipped.
Adrian's eyes flicked past her then, settling on Lila. The shift was subtle, yet it transformed everything. Where steel had cut through his wife, something far gentler touched the maid. A recognition, a quiet respect. Lila stood near the serving station, her hands folded, the wine stains on her apron stark under the lights. She met his gaze only briefly, her face composed, but the softening in his expression lingered, a silent acknowledgement of the cruelty she had endured and the strength she had held onto.
When his attention returned to Victoria, the warmth vanished, replaced by a blade of cold resolve. "This ends here," he said, his voice even, controlled, but resonating with finality. The bride's painted perfection began to fissure, her eyes darting toward the guests who now sat rigid, unsure whether to applaud or recoil. In that moment, the power she had wielded so mercilessly slipped from her grip, and for the first time that evening, it was clear to everyone present that the spectacle was no longer hers to command. The reckoning had begun. The air seemed to still as Adrian's words rolled across the tables, quiet yet undeniable. The garden, once filled with chatter and clinking glasses, became a cathedral of silence where every breath felt heavy. His tone never rose, but the weight of each syllable struck harder than any shouted accusation. "No wealth, no title, no ring," he said, his gaze fixed on his bride yet resonating through the crowd, "gives you the right to strip another human being of dignity." The truth hung in the night air, sharp and unyielding, impossible to escape.
Eyes darted between the couple, the spectacle now transformed into something raw and unpolished. Guests shifted in their seats, some lowering their glasses, others holding their breath as though afraid to disturb the gravity of the moment. Adrian lifted his hand, pointing toward Lila, who stood frozen near the serving station, her tray empty, but her composure intact. "This woman you mocked," he continued, his voice softening, "has shown more grace in one evening than you in all your diamonds." The murmur that followed was not the nervous tittering that had accompanied Victoria's cruelty, but something deeper, a stirring of conscience. Applause began hesitantly, a single pair of hands clapping near the back, then another, until it rippled across the tables like a tide no one could hold back. Guests who had moments earlier turned away in silence now leaned forward, caught in the current of truth. Cameras flashed, phones recorded, and every angle captured the collapse of an illusion meticulously crafted for appearances. Victoria's face, once glowing with poise, drained of color as though the pearls around her neck had tightened into chains. Her lips parted, but no words came, her voice strangled by the weight of exposure. She glanced from guest to guest, seeking an ally, but found only eyes that avoided hers, unwilling to share in her disgrace. For years she had wielded beauty and wealth like weapons, but under Adrian's unflinching judgment, they shattered into ornaments of vanity, powerless to shield her. Lila stood still, her heart pounding, though her face betrayed none of it. She had not asked for defense, had not begged for justice, yet here it was, delivered not with anger, but with truth that could not be ignored. For the first time that evening, the balance of power shifted, not with spectacle or cruelty, but with the undeniable strength of dignity revealed under fire. And in that moment, the night was no longer Victoria's performance. It was Lila's quiet triumph. The echo of Victoria's heels faded into the night, her jeweled train dragging across the marble as if even the gown no longer wished to carry her. Guests whispered behind lifted hands, their voices low but unrelenting, like waves pulling her further from the pedestal she had once commanded. No applause followed her exit, no sympathetic glance softened the sting. She left with diamonds still glittering, but stripped of the only thing she had truly craved: respect. In the wake of her departure, silence lingered, heavy but cleansing. The chandeliers above swayed gently, scattering fragments of light across the lawn, and the roses arching over the garden seemed to bow in quiet acknowledgement of the shift. At the head table, Adrian remained still for a moment longer before turning, his steps carrying him not to the empty space where his bride had been, but toward the figure who had endured more than anyone should on such a night. Lila stood in her stained uniform, crimson streaks still marking the fabric, but there was no defeat in her posture. Her shoulders were square, her chin lifted, her gaze steady, as though she had decided, long before this evening, that no humiliation could undo the dignity she carried within. Guests watched her, with new eyes now. The same people who had moments earlier looked past her as if she were invisible. Whispers of admiration rippled among them, but Lila remained untouched by it, grounded in something far deeper than fleeting approval. Adrian stopped before her, his tuxedo immaculate, his presence commanding. Yet he seemed smaller now, not in stature, but in the way he shed the armor of wealth and expectation. He did not extend a hand or offer empty words. Instead, his voice, low and even, carried enough weight to fill the garden. "The wedding wasn't ruined," he said. "It was revealed."
The words landed not just for her, but for everyone still seated beneath the golden glow, a truth too sharp to ignore. A murmur of assent swept through the crowd, soft applause following, not for spectacle, not for wealth, but for grace. And in that quiet, the evening transformed. It was no longer about the pearls or chandeliers or the grandeur of the Harrington estate. It was about a maid who had stood her ground in silence, and a man who chose to honor that truth. Long after the music resumed and the glasses refilled, the memory of that revelation remained, etched in every witness like a vow. If this story struck you, share it. Somewhere, a woman has been dismissed, mocked, or humiliated in silence, just like she was that night under the chandeliers. She needs to see that dignity can outshine cruelty. Tell us in the comments, have you ever been made to feel small, only to stand taller in the end? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, drop a comment, and share it with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe to Black Stories Untold for more stories that uncover hidden struggles, celebrate strength, and remind us that every voice matters.